Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Banker Next Door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. Today, we're going to be reviewing the Netflix documentary Skandal, Bringing Down Wirecard. I hope everyone will find this enjoyable. It really is a kind of a wild roller coaster of a story. I didn't report on this earlier because I was waiting for a little bit of updated information to come out, and you'll see that at the end when I get to kind of the aftermath as to what happened with some of the individuals involved in this whole thing. So with that, let's bring up our little PowerPoint here. So again, we're going to be reviewing the Netflix documentary called Skandal, spelled with a K. So Skandal, Bringing Down Wirecard, and that's because it's a German company. So let's hit some of the highlights here real quick. So first of all, this was a Netflix documentary. It was produced in 2022, approximate runtime of 1 hour, 32 minutes. The director was James Erskine. This is based on the book Money Men, A Hot Start, A Billion-Dollar Fraud, A Fight for the Truth by Dan McCrum. And the summary is just the rise and fall of Wirecard itself. So Wirecard was started in 1999, actually under a different name, and the company was actually on the brink of failure during the dot-com bubble burst. Really kind of, I would call it flandering about at that point. And then a gentleman named Dr. Marcus Braun, who was an academic, highly intellectual guy, had been involved, had worked for a number of different consulting firms over there in Germany. He decided to come in, invest a bunch of his capital into the business and basically refocus the business onto, basically internet payment services. The problem was the main bulk of the company's business at that time came from gambling websites and what I'm going to refer to as P websites. And I have to call it that just because I'm kind of a little afraid of the YouTube algorithm and basically what it will or will not ban. I think people will understand what I mean by P websites. But basically the P and the gambling websites made up the heart of the Wirecard business at that time. Again, nothing illegal, but not necessarily the greatest type of customers, if you will, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. So I put together here kind of a timeline, and we're gonna kind of come back to this as we go through a number of these items in here. So first, I just want to part off. So in 2005, this is a little bit of the stock exchange history, if you will, of Wirecard. So Wirecard became listed on what was known as the Prime Standard Stock Market segment through a reverse IPO. In 2006, Wirecard was included on the TACDAX, and then finally in 2018, it became listed on the DAX, which was basically the premier market exchange in Germany. In 2007, Wirecard Asia Pacific was founded. That's very important. We'll come back to that. In 2008, Wirecard introduced virtual prepaid cards for online payments. In 2014, Wirecard expanded into New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and Turkey. And in 2016, Wirecard purchased the prepaid card services from Citigroup and opened operations in the US. They also purchased a South American internet payment service provider in Brazil. In 2019, SoftBank invested in Wirecard, which didn't turn out to be such a great investment. They also tried to make a push into China. So our story begins here. Basically, in 2014, Wirecard is really growing. They're expanding by leaps and bounds. Things are going great or whatever. And a gentleman named Dan McCrum, who is an investigative journalist for the Financial Times. And for anybody who doesn't know, the Financial Times is the equivalent of the financial newspaper for Europe. So in other words, here in the US, we have the Wall Street Journal. Over in Europe, they have the Financial Times. Highly recommend subscribing. If I've had subscriptions to the Financial Times in the past. Fantastic paper, very well done, very informative. So yeah, anybody who hasn't checked it out, you should definitely go check it out. They have a great website too. But I digress. So Dan is alerted to some potential bad things going on at Wirecard. They basically that they might be attempting to buy growth by setting up kind of phony businesses in Asia. So, but before we get into the heart of the story, just a couple extra things to understand about the dynamics of the situation. So Wirecard was basically the PayPal of Germany. Their CEO, Dr. Braun, he was considered kind of the Steve Jobs of the Alps, which, I thought was kind of funny, but it was kind of interesting. Now, Germany as a country, they had a lot of pride in Wirecard, and they also had a lot of there was a vested interest in the success of this company. Basically, Germany wanted their own big, financial technology company. They're always kind of looking at Silicon Valley with Microsoft and Apple and Google and all the other big social media and big tech firms there, and they wanted their own representation, if you will, or they wanted to start to build up their own tech community. And so basically, Wirecard was that company. Like I said, it was the German version of PayPal, payment processor, and it had really blown up. And and so Germany was really touting the success of Wirecard. They were really invested in it, and they had a vested interest in keeping that company there and keeping that company rolling, and that'll come into play here to see. So, and then just to point out, so from 2004 to 2019, the company grew from roughly 130 employees to over 6,000. So, and the company grew to have a market cap of approximately around 20 billion euros. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so one thing to note here, okay, so in 2006, the U.S. passed what was called the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act. And this act prohibited gambling businesses from knowingly accepting payments in connection with the participation of another person in a bet or wager that involved the use of the internet. So this was an issue for Wirecard. This was a big problem for Wirecard. And so what Wirecard did was they basically miscoded these transactions to hide the payments. And then also they got involved with other money laundering that was going on. Like, for example, what I refer to as the P business, that was encoded as emotional content, which I thought was kind of funny. But basically then Wirecard began setting up these shell companies in England to basically run transactions through. So let's go back for just a second. So if we go back to our timeline here. So in 2006, the U.S. passes this gambling law, which is going to be a problem for a lot of their customers. So in 2007, Wirecard then goes and opens the Asian Pacific. That's when so they move some operations over into Asia to basically try, and then they set up these shell companies in England, which they were then routing a lot of these payments through and miscoding them, trying to obfuscate what was really going on. Then, like I said, in 2008, they get into the virtual prepaid card business online. All right, so let's get back down again here. So, so basically, so at the same time, FT is looking into Wirecard. So are a couple of young ladies named Fahmi Kadir and Christina Clemente. They were basically investors from New York that had a kind of like, if you want to call it like a small hedge fund, I guess you could describe it that way. But they basically went down and they got into Wirecard's U.S. office, which was located in Conshohocken, PA, and that's kind of where this story comes in for me. This is where I got really invested in this interest, because their location was not far from where I live, and I was very familiar with the city, the small town of Conshohocken. I was familiar with a lot of the office buildings that were over there, and back in 2016, I happened to be in this one particular office building where I was calling on another company, and I happened to notice, it's like, oh, there's this newer company in there called Wirecard, and they had a very large space, and I kind of wandered in, and there really wasn't anybody in there. And, I kind of talked, eventually somebody kind of wandered out, and I talked to them for a few minutes, and it was like, okay, yeah, it was kind of like, we're just setting things up here, whatever, blah, blah, blah. If you're, we specialize in prepaid card, that kind of thing. And I didn't think anything of it and left. What was interesting was during this documentary, these two young ladies, they go down there and they go in and they, knock on the door, kind of same thing that I did. Only they were there for a specific purpose, whereas I was just kind of curious. But they walked in, again, just see, 20, 30 people in this very large office space. And it was just, again, started talking about prepaid cards. And then there were some things that were said about the limits that could be received, up to like, I think it was like $150,000 type of credit that you could get on a prepaid card, which seemed, you know, incredible considering the fact that most prepaid cards probably don't go to any more than say like $10,000. But so they kind of turned, you know, this kind of really got them thinking that, hey, something funky may be up here. Yeah, it's still not hard proof of anything, but something may be funky there. But I just thought that again, when I kind of saw that, that's what really got me invested in this whole thing, just because it was very close to home in a very, very real way for me. So okay. So FT starts writing these articles questioning what's going on here with Wirecard. And Wirecard had this pattern where if any time anybody in the media would start asking them about saying, hey, what's going on here? What's happening? They always put it back to this whole narrative of, oh, we're being attacked by unscrupulous short sellers. There's these rogue short sellers in the market, but there's like a whole gang of them, and they're just coming after us, and they're so jealous of us, and they hate us, and they just go. Anybody who really knows anything about finance and has really studied the markets for a long time knows that that's just it's basically a load of crap. It just it's just yeah. You know, anytime I always, you know, and again, other companies have tried this tactic in the past. You know, I think it's garbage. You know, everybody's always trying to blame the short sellers. The biggest short sellers in the world are your big banks, like, you know, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. You know, those guys are short selling all day, every day. So you know, and then your big, you know, hedge funds like Citadel and stuff. So I find it kind of funny that you know, this is what the big boys do every day, but yet somehow it's this small group of you know, independent little short sellers, you know, that are wreaking all the havoc. So, but anyway, so this investigation is going on now with Wirecard, and you got Dan kind of running around checking on some things. He's got a couple other guys that he works with, another investigative journalist named Paul, some different investors that he's talking to about, hey, have you heard anything, kind of what's going on there? So they're trying to dig stuff up here. So now enter the COO of Wirecard, a gentleman named Jan Marsalek. So Jan comes in, and Jan is a very young, good-looking, charismatic guy. He's a very good communicator. So he comes in, and he basically gets interested in kind of what Dan is doing, and he kind of finds Gary, and so he reaches out to Gary, and he knows Paul, and he reaches out to Paul, and he tells Paul, hey, I'd really like to get a meeting with Gary. I'd like to sit down with him because he's with the Financial Times. So Paul kind of puts this meeting together, and they sit down, and they have this very kind of weird and uncomfortable meeting, but something quite extraordinary happens at the meeting. So Jan suggests that he's potentially willing to bribe Paul to get him to, you know, basically to get FT to stop writing bad articles about them and maybe just start writing some positive articles about them. Paul basically says, no, I don't do that. I'm not corrupt. Like, I've never taken money for anything ever. And then Jan says something incredible to him. He says, oh, I know that you haven't, because I've seen proof. And then at that moment, Paul realizes, like, wow, this dude has seen my bank records. This guy knows way more about me than I probably realized when I first walked in. So the question becomes, how did Jan know that? How is Jan, this guy who works for a, you know, big tech company? I mean, sure, they've got a lot of money. They could hire private investigators and things like that, but even private investigators would have a very hard time getting a hold of somebody's bank records. That's not an easy thing to do. And so that left a very interesting thing open, and I'm going to answer exactly how he knew that as we get along here. So now, one thing to point out with prepaid cards, there is a huge amount of fraud in prepaid cards, and I'm probably going to have to do a whole episode just on this, and then why is there fraud in prepaid cards? Because prepaid cards, they're hard to trace, very hard to trace, very hard to track. So now we get into, at this point, you know, we've had this meeting with Paul and Gary and Jan. It didn't go the way that you know, probably Paul or Gary thought it was going to go. So they end up walking away. Paul ends up perhaps more convinced than ever that there's something really funky going on here with Wirecard. So, you know, they're continuing on with that. So now we get into the part of the story where I call around the world. We end up going to Singapore. We end up going to Munich, Austria, and Libya. So at this point, so there's a company called Zafar. And this is now 2016, and Zafar releases a report that basically, and then Dan and the guy who does this Zafara, they come up with this plan where it's like, okay, you know, Zafar is going to release this report on Wirecard, and then I am going to comment on it. They did this kind of quickly, and they didn't do it the way that they should, and this ended up becoming kind of a hot mess, and it kind of blew back on FT, and they ended up having to do, like, you know, have internal investigations, and, you know, Dan kind of got in some hot water and stuff like that. So you know, so it was did not go basically as according to plan. So let's see here, moving on. Okay, so Wirecard acquire Citi's prepaid card business. And then, okay, so now, again, like I said, we get to Singapore, and a lady named Stephanie Palma, who's an FT reporter over in Singapore, she basically starts looking into what's going on there with Wirecard over there, you know, in Singapore. And you know, so then, and in the process of her investigation, this whistleblower named Pav Gill, who's a company lawyer for Wirecard, and he comes forward and basically just gives them a ton of information on what's going on with Wirecard. He explains to them that, yeah, they've set up a lot of shell companies, and they say that they have these businesses operating at these locations, and there's nothing there. So the reporter basically goes out, she goes to a number of different locations and finds that there is absolutely nothing at these locations. These locations are all bogus. It's basically houses in the middle of nowhere. Goes up, you know, people had been kind of contracted in a way with Wirecard, and Wirecard just approached them and said, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of money. We just want to use your address and things like that. So at this point, they've basically got it. They've basically uncovered this whole thing and said, okay, here we go. We've got it. We've got the goods. This is kind of all coming out. So now at this point, they come out, they put out this huge article. And now with this new article coming out, basically the stock price of Wirecard just comes crashing down. German regulators now start to get involved with this. But there's a catch. The German regulators, at first, they want to protect Wirecard, because what did I say? The German government was invested in Wirecard. They wanted Wirecard to be there. They did not want to lose Wirecard, you know, as this big fintech wire payment or payment processing company there in Europe. So the regulator comes in and pushes back. But there's just so much evidence at this point now that it's basically really hard for the regulator to say that there's not something going on here. And what FT eventually uncovers is that 50% of the global sales for Wirecard were coming from 3 companies over in Europe. In the Philippines, you had a company called PayEasy. They, again, went to this office. There was nothing there. They drove out to this house for a company called Cone Pay. There was nothing there. And then, and again, and this was the moment when they found out that these 3 OPEC companies, it was just all a lot of nonsense. But then, interestingly, the stock just keeps going. The stock just keeps going up, and it's like, well, why is the stock going up here? So now we find out that SoftBank comes into the fold, and SoftBank has made an investment of $900 million into Wirecard. And so that kind of, for the moment, now again, we're getting into 2018, coming into early 2019 here. That at the moment has kind of bailed Wirecard out. Now Wirecard is they're kind of hanging on here. So despite all this negative press, despite all these questions that are coming, what's going on with this business, the $900 million investment by SoftBank seems to reassure the markets that, hey, you know what, a lot of this stuff is probably nonsense and Wirecard is probably fine. So then we get into France and we get into this investor named Nick Gold. And this is where kind of Wirecard plays kind of dirty. So Wirecard ends up, long story short, they end up setting Nick up in this meeting with this fake sheik. They record it, and then they put it out there as they edit it and then put it out there as this press story once again with the whole short seller thing. Oh, here's this nasty short seller is coming back to us, and he's trying to, they tried to set up this deal with this sheik and put hundreds of millions of dollars in to short the stock and mess us all up and everything. So it just wasn't a good look, and it showed you that the lengths that Wirecard was going to try to keep this scandal under wraps. So, so again, basically, again, we've got the story is breaking in Germany, says that and again, like I said, now this new story comes out because of all the thing that happens with Nick that basically says that FT is corrupt, and this is in Germany. FT has to conduct an investigation. And then we find out in Munich, now we go to Munich, and we find out that Jan has this secret office there where he meets with people and he throws parties, and 3 of the people that he hangs out with are former Russian and Israeli intelligence officers. The building is right across the street from the Russian consulate. Basically, and then we find out that the government wants all this payment information from Wirecard. They want to get all this payment information. And then we get into Vienna, Austria with a lady named Stephanie Crisper. And then it gets into this whole situation with UN migrants and immigration. And then that ends us into Libya and North Africa, where you've got immigrants that are trying to get into Europe. And now Jan is trying to basically finance these refugee camps. You got former Secret Service agents from Russia. He's trying to put together almost like a little small army of 15 to 20,000 men, almost like a border force. Jan, he appears to be working with the Russians to capitalize on this migrant issue. This is all going on. All these different things are kind of happening. And while all this is going on, the guys at FT are under a lot of pressure. Basically, Paul and Dan, they claim that they had up to 28 different private investigators just following them all over the place, all the time. So they had to, they could never talk on the phone. They had to take different routes home all the time. They had to be just incredibly careful about everything that they were doing and saying, which again is just kind of wild. So now, again, we're in 2019, and you've got early 2019, you got SoftBank making this investment in the company. And now we've got Angela Merkel from Germany she is now over in China, trying to get Wirecard into the Chinese market, trying to really help them to boost their sales and everything in there. You've got but the questions, and then FT finally came out with another big report about Dubai. There was a shell company in Dubai called Al Alan, I'm sorry, and that just kind of that just kind of broke the whole thing open at that point. Now, Wirecard's main auditor was EY, and EY was, had been their auditor, their accountant for a number of years. So they decided that they were going to go out and hire KPMG to do an independent third-party audit of the company, and that this was going to prove that there was no problems, there was no issue, there was nothing going on. So a few months go by, probably 3 or 4 months go by with that. And in the meantime, there's this story that's kind of evolving that Wirecard might potentially buy Deutsche Bank, the biggest bank in Germany, and try to turn it into what they called Wirebank. And so you know, the speculation probably comes in that Wirecard was probably going to try to hide all their fraud inside Deutsche Bank if they could buy them. So, you know, but that's going on. And then finally, on June 18th of 2020, the audit results come in, and it was basically game over at that point. KPMG comes in and says there's $1.9 billion over in Asia that's unaccounted for. This is just not real money that's on the balance sheet. This is basically all fraud. And at that point, the whole house of cards just comes tumbling down. Jan basically takes off. He skips the country. Dr. Braun, it gets arrested. And Wirecard, with their 20 billion euro market cap, just completely becomes almost worthless overnight. They become the first company in the history of the DAX market exchange to get delisted and to go bust, which is absolutely wild. So this whole thing blows up. But now, that's kind of the end in a nutshell. The company dissolves. You know, Braun gets arrested. Jan takes off. He exits, gets out of there, and now we're kind of left with a whole bunch of questions, like what really happened here? Why did they perpetrate this fraud? Why did they feel the need to do this? And we don't really get a whole lot of answers there. So, but before I get into the aftermath, I just want to give my overall rating for this documentary. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. It was really good, very well done. My only issue was that I felt like they could have given a little bit more context. Like they could have probably just tried to make this thing an extra, probably 5 or 10 minutes would have done the trick, and just added, like I said, just kind of added a little bit more to the timeline, a little bit more depth about some of the different things that were happening at different points. And I think could have made this thing a little bit clearer as to what was happening. But overall, highly recommend it. Only an hour and a half. Great watch. Is very entertaining. So definitely, I would say check it out. So now let's get to the aftermath. So what happened after the fact here? So Dan McCrum ended up going to write his book, and he ends up winning the highest award in journalism in Germany. The investors lost billions of euros. They lost 20 billion euros, which is the equivalent of $21.8 billion in US money. EY, the accounting firm, only ends up getting fined 500,000 euros, and they get barred from auditing certain kinds of companies for 2 years. EY did have to pay a fine of $100 million in the US after the auditors were found cheating on some ethics exams. So, does one thing have to do with the other? Not necessarily, but maybe that was a price they had to pay in some way, shape, or form. But just the fact that EY got off in this thing with simply a $500,000 fine and then got barred for 2 years from auditing certain companies, I mean, I thought that was, a slap on the wrist. I mean, especially if you go back to the fact that Arthur Andersen got completely put out of business when Enron failed and that whole fraud was revealed. And then we have Dr. Braun. So Dr. Braun, he gets arrested. He gets charged with multiple crimes. His legal proceedings are still ongoing. He testified at his trial in March of 2023. Wasn't really forthcoming with a whole lot of answers. Just gave kind of a lot of, what I would say like financial speak. Still kind of playing the part of the big tech CEO, like as if he was on CNBC or Bloomberg or something like that, and just not really. I think the judge tried to hit him kind of hard, and he just didn't, wasn't really forthcoming with a whole lot. So now the trial is continuing and probably won't finish until sometime in 2024, just because they literally have just dozens and dozens of witnesses that they're trying to bring in a lot of information on this. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see, what happens. Hopefully I'll give some kind of update on that as we find out, or we get some kind of conclusion on this case. So now here's the really fascinating thing. Jan Marsalek, he remains a fugitive, and he is suspected of living in Dubai. So the Wall Street Journal just came out with an article here, and I'm going to click out of this for a second. So the Wall Street Journal came out with an article back on December 15th and basically said, Juan remains one of the most wanted men in the world. Marsalek has also provided assistance to the mercenary organization of, I can never say this gentleman's name, like the Russian Prigozhin. He's a gentleman who actually just got killed. He was just assassinated in the his plane was basically blown up and crashed. But but they're saying that now he's now involved in the reconfiguration of this gentleman's business empire in Africa on behalf of Russian officials from his new domicile in Dubai, according to Western intelligence. So, and there's a whole lot of interesting stuff in here. So Wirecard got its processing payments for the P websites on its way to becoming an internet finance behemoth during its heyday. The company claimed to process 140 billion of transactions a year on behalf of 250,000 businesses, making it a rival of Square, which is now Block. And it was briefly valued at more than any German bank. But Jan apparently was obsessed with cloak and dagger world of espionage. It said that he basically ran a ring of 5 UK-based Bulgarians, and he spied for Russia. Western intelligence officials also say that Marsalek was visited Dubai and worked with a retired Russian intelligence officer based there who has been acquiring weapons for Moscow. They believe he now spends much of his time in the Emirate together with some of his associates. The government of the United Arab Emirates, of which Dubai is a member, did not respond to requests for comment. So, and then it says, while running Wirecard, Marsalek helped the GRU, which is Russia's military agency, and the SVR, its main overseas spying organization, pay intelligence officers and informants and funnel money into conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa, according to the officials. So Marsalek was born in a small town in Vienna. His paternal grandfather, Hans Marsalek, was an ethnic Czech communist and resistance fighter who survived a Nazi concentration camp. He co-founded what later became Austria's intelligence agency. The elder Marsalek received Austria's highest honor for service to the state, and he passed away in 2011. So it's just very interesting. So it said that Marsalek, he cultivated intelligence operatives throughout his time at Wirecard, according to investigators and a German parliamentary inquiry. Business associates included intelligence officers and ex-spies from the U.S., Europe, and the Middle East. Former business associates and officials familiar with the European investigations into his activities. Wirecard provided these people and organizations with credit cards and bank accounts and shifted money between European and conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa, they said. 2 former business associates of Marsalek said the executive told them that he worked for Russian intelligence agencies and for their Western counterparts. Now here's what we get when I talked earlier about Germany having a vested interest here. So here we go. Here's why. Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service, the BND, not to be confused with the Banker Next Door podcast, as well as the country's equivalent of the FBI, the BKA, told Parliament during a public inquiry that ran from September 2020 to June of 2021 that they had used Wirecard credit cards and bank accounts for their agents abroad, as well as for paying informants at home and abroad. Senior German intelligence officials confirmed this to the Wall Street Journal. BKA relied heavily on Wirecard at the time of its collapse. The company was handling 1/3 of credit card payments that BKA officers used to pay informants. A senior member of the German intelligence community said the services used Wirecard because it was more amenable than many other Western regulated banks, which are often reluctant to work with intelligence agencies for compliance and legal reasons and fear of reputational damage. Wirecard services were used to finance Russian covert operations, pay informers or military contracts, and fund classified projects such as arms purchases, intelligence officials said. And then it says Marsalek ordered Wirecard bank employees to breach data protection and other rules to compile data about clients, according to testimony from former executives to German prosecutors. Several intelligence officials said it could have provided information about intelligence agents' work as well. And then some officials suspect he was passing this data on to Russia. Because Marsalek, who was known for jet setting around the globe as an executive, chose Russia as his most frequent destination, taking dozens of trips there in the years before he was forced to flee to Moscow. So there you have it. So Jan is still running about the world, possibly hanging out in Dubai, possibly hanging out in Russia. We don't know, but he's still on the run. He's still on the run. Remains a fugitive of justice. Still running around and doing a lot of things. And he just became a fascinating character in this whole story. So Wirecard. At the end of the day, I mean, this was again, it was kind of a wild ride. It got into all kinds of things here. Prepaid card fraud, money laundering, intelligence agencies. Different governments around the world. Trying to, migrant issues going into Europe. All this different kind of wild stuff got tangled into this kind of incredible story here. So again, I hope people kind of found this interesting. Like I said, I would highly recommend, go check out go check this out when you have time. I will put a link to the Wall Street Journal article at the bottom here, just in case you want to go on and check that out. But again, I hope everybody just liked it. If please give a big thumbs up. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will be back again real soon with some more things to come. So I thank everybody a lot, and hope you guys have a great rest of the weekend.